Welcome to our webinar, Executive Insight, Accelerating Growth and Protecting Margins by Optimizing Lead to Revenue, brought to you by Agile, the publisher of CFO Magazine and CFO.com, and sponsored by BillingPlatform and Navint. I'm Joe Fleischer, and I'll be your moderator. I'd like to tell you about our distinguished guests joining us today, are Andrew Daly, Managing Director with MGI Research, Stephen Terry, Executive Vice President with the Advisory Practice of Navint, and Brian Dingman, Vice President of Solutions Engineering with BillingPlatform. Now, I'd like to tell you also about the companies that each of our distinguished guests represents. Just quickly, MGI Research was formed in 2008 by former senior analysts from Gartner, Morgan Stanley, and SoundView. They are based in New York, San Francisco, and Amsterdam, and provide research and advisory services to tech buyers, suppliers, and investors with a focus on tech trends that are disruptive and durable, including cloud, software as a service, and next generation of business applications and monetization, supply chain, financial systems, payments and infrastructure, among others. Their methodology is quantitative and structured. They publish company ratings, research scenarios, market forecasts, market maps, and host conferences focused on innovation and software. They also have developed a franchise in the area of software and internet company valuation models, and overall during the course of any given year they speak with more than, well over 200 technology companies and hundreds of business and technology executives. Navint is an advisory and technology services firm that enables enterprise organizations to drive growth and operational efficiency throughout the lead to revenues lifecycle. Navint connects deep strategy and process expertise with technologies across the front and back office to help enable new levels of flexibility, efficiency, and customer centricity. I would note that Navint supports engagements across a wide variety of partners and platforms, including Salesforce, to design and implement a comprehensive approach regarding CRM, CPQ, CLM, billing, and ERP. And BillingPlatform helps companies accelerate ideas into revenue. Their cloud-based platform enables enterprises to easily automate quote-to-cash processes. Their flagship product, Billing Cloud, gives companies the power to enable any kind of billing model and support even the most complex recurring revenue relationships. Their customers bring innovative new products and services to market 30% more quickly and reduce operational speed by as much as 50%, all due to the flexibility of Billing Platform solutions. So what I'd like to do now is turn the floor over to Andrew Daly of MGI Research. He will set the stage and share some key observations, and then I'm looking forward to a discussion with Andrew, as well as with Steve of Navint and Brian of BillingPlatform. With that said, and at this stage, it is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Andrew Daly of MGI Research. Please give a warm welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome, everyone. Over the course of economic cycles and business trends, at a given point in time, the spotlight tends to shine brightly on an individual executive inside the C-suite. 2020 has undoubtedly been the year of the Chief Financial Officer, as the entire organization and investors look to the CFO to prudently guide the business through these uncharted times. Similarly, business processes each have their time in the sun. The Lead-to-Revenue process, which is part of an organization's monetization capability, is receiving increasing attention and investment due to its ability to affect top and bottom line performance. Many of the top business priorities today, omni-channel commerce, giving customers more pricing and payments options, maintaining margins, all of these fall within the Lead-to-Revenue process. This is one process which affects how customers perceive your brand and impact directly the financial results. So let's take a look here at the key issues relating to Lead-to-Revenue. Is it time to play offense or defense? We're seeing very uneven results across industries and even within industries. The pandemic and its associated economic devastation have altered the discussion of digital transformation from what was largely an academic exercise to focused sprints on tactical business improvements. Since the lockdowns in March, poorly automated and semi-automated processes have undergone an X-ray inspection, and sources of friction have been pinpointed. For those companies who are the pandemic winners, we're seeing them deliver growth rates that are 2 to 3x their industry average and even higher gains in terms of valuation. In their case, it's about playing smart offense and extending their competitive edge. We believe there are both process and technology investments that can provide short-term business stabilization and long-term differentiation. And in our panel discussion, our distinguished panelists will share perspectives on the state of digital transformation. Second, which technology and business trends are durable and which ones are not? How will the business requirements landscape change, and which technologies will enable those changes? Our panel will take up the issues associated with process and technology trends and those that preserve revenue and margins, and we'll be sharing what they're seeing in terms of what leaders are doing to balance the trade-offs between the need for short-term results with endeavors that require or demand a longer-term time horizon. And third, where are the quick wins? We'll take a look at how to quickly harvest the low-hanging fruit that's part of an improved LeadtoRevenue process. And under the banner of business simplification, this will be the third panel topic that we'll talk about. So let's take a look at kind of COVID-19 and the LeadtoRevenue process. Amidst COVID-19 and its associated economic impact, really three things have come to the fore. First, it's really forced organizations to address their monetization debt. The manual processes, the workarounds, and the Microsoft Excel Band-Aids have been exposed. Companies without a functional, frictionless monetization capability have obviously been hurt. CFOs without the tools to project cash positions over time and over multiple scenarios have been disadvantaged. 60% of finance teams struggled to make their forecasts in the second quarter. Those with on-premise systems also suffered. And we all saw who had to go into an office to collect physical checks. Second, in a single word, it's been about agility. The organizations that have fared best have demonstrated agility in their thinking and their people, as well as agility in their systems. It's been the ability to quickly step outside of the old processes and craft and adopt new, improved, and in some cases, even more profitable motions. So here's an example. Adobe, which is a $10 billion leader in digital marketing software, was scheduled to hold its Summit user conference in Las Vegas in March. The event obviously shifted to an online format. In fact, they were the first tech company to attempt a mega virtual event of this scale. Instead of 20,000 in-person attendees, the event attracted almost 100,000 online viewers. But here's the catch. Adobe used it as an opportunity to connect its event systems into its upstream marketing and downstream payments and billing capabilities. So it was not only able to reach a larger audience for that event and all events going forward, but its entire prospect to disclosure cycle is now more tightly integrated, making personalized marketing, sales, billing, and even collections possible, all without increasing their costs. And then third, the pandemic has really created an opportunity for companies to finally abandon unprofitable business practices, partners, and even customers. And we see this expressed in the rapid shifts to new distribution models, both in the reduction in certain sales channels, so the reduction of resellers and distributors, and the addition of some new channels, online and direct. And the pandemic is also giving organizations more courage and agency to experiment with pricing models. So we're seeing faster shifts to recurring revenue models, and we're seeing even usage and outcome-based models being trialed. And intelligent pricing is also a way to expand addressable market without having to make fundamental product changes. The pandemic has also forced CFOs to take a hard look at the people costs and start planning on technology investments that yield greater accuracy and fidelity when it comes to things like billing and collections, but also deliver more efficient scalability from a human resources point of view. The latest forecast from the OECD pegs 2020 GDP growth at a positive 2% for China, negative 1 to 2% for South Korea, negative 5% for the US, and the Euro countries and Britain at a negative 8 to 10% respectively. So companies who are able to access markets beyond the US and Europe will clearly be in an advantage. And often the barriers to market access are associated with an organization's monetization capabilities, such as being able to handle foreign payments, proper tax and tariff handling, and the ability to invoice accurately in local languages and norms. Earlier this week, the British government indicated restrictions on movement and economic activity that may be in place until March 2021. So a prolonged pandemic coupled with increasing geopolitical risks and the absence of additional federal stimulus spending translate into what is at best described as the 90% economy, or it may be an 80 or 85% economy. And with continued supply and demand disruptions, we expect to see a culling of the herd across industries as companies lacking in agility will be forced into new capital structures and or forced into finding partners to shelter from the storm. 2020 has already seen a significant amount of M&A and sizable financing activities. So just taken as a whole, there will undoubtedly be more time and pressure, performance pressure placed on CFOs. Let's look at where investment and monetization capabilities is happening today and where it was likely to go. So there's continued resource pouring into the tactical improvements in areas like invoicing accuracy, stopping revenue leakage, improving collections and decreasing DSO, and minimizing margin compression through more structured sales quoting tools. The area of what we call payments orchestration, which is a set of enabling technologies and processes, is seeing a bump in investment as companies look to lower interchange rates and increase authorization rates, for example. So in this area alone, we're seeing organizations realize net gains of 500 basis points to a full 2%. And the resulting higher customer satisfaction and reduction in churn add even more value to these types of investments. And finally, pricing and packaging are getting more attention. Price is the single lever companies can pull to increase the top and bottom line. Having greater flexibility and modern billing tools give finance teams more control by making it easier to analyze profitability by product, for example, which is an insight that still many companies struggle with. And finally, over the next 24 months, we expect a wave of finance and IT systems consolidation projects. The average Fortune 1000 company has over 20 billing systems that each have an average age of 12 years. These are brittle, expensive to maintain, and are really a barrier to company growth. Nearly 10 years ago, MGI Research introduced this concept of an Agile Monetization Platform. This is not a product, it's not something you can go out and buy today. It's a conceptual model to look at the coarse-grained elements integral to how a company monetizes and how it directs its lead-to-revenue process. A lot of companies are using this today as a benchmarking tool to assess the age, effectiveness, and efficiency of each element, and as a way to identify gaps and shortcomings. And this chart will obviously be included in the takeaway materials from today's session, and we'll be referring to this in our panel discussion. Looking at the functionality within AMP, there are nearly a dozen product categories that are growing faster than the overall IT market. So this is an indication of where CFOs and CIOs are leaning in and placing their bets. And the best-in-class suppliers in these segments are growing 25 to 50+%. So we're seeing real investment go into a wide spectrum of individual segments across the lead-to-revenue process. In the maelstrom that 2020 has been so far, it's really elevated the primacy and the importance of the CFO. And we're seeing that the distribution of winners and losers has been very uneven, and it's likely to become even more pronounced over the next 12 months. So whether you're playing defense or offense, we see the lead-to-revenue process as becoming the single most important area for improvement and investment, as it has the largest impact on customers, competitiveness, and financial results. So with that, let me hand it over to Joe, and we can start our panel discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for setting the stage. And during the course of our discussion, as Andrew mentioned, we're going to highlight key areas, 3 key areas, and we're going to start with the state of digital transformation as our first of 3 key areas. And with that in mind, I want to pose our first question to you, Steve, starting with you, Steve. As finance leaders think about their next 1 to 5 years and their company's transformation agendas during that time frame, and in the face of, as Andrew mentioned, so much day-to-day uncertainty and volatility, Steve, how would you describe LeadtoRevenue the role of LeadtoRevenue now, say, versus a year ago, and what has changed a year ago versus now with regard to the role of LeadtoRevenue?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. There's really 3 key points here that I'll get to. The fundamental, LeadtoRevenue has been emerging as a theme concurrent with a couple of other key themes of the last several years, right? The transition to recurring revenue, the digital enablers and the ability to process a relationship with a customer, whether that's in the sales cycle, the service and support cycle, or payment cycles. So these things have really been going on for a while, and LeadtoRevenue has been building quite ahead of steam for really along 3 paths. Number 1 is strategic. So from a strategic point of view, has been and continues to be a growing awareness of the absolute relationship and the need to connect your functional systems and product catalog and sales motions, right, between the mechanics and go-to-market decisions, and connect them very closely in order to achieve the big 3 goals, which is drive and preserve revenue, operate efficiently, and do so with adaptability to change, right? So that's been growing in the marketplace for some time. At a functional level, below that, there is an even more and deeper awareness that down in the engine room, that means that CPQ and billing and e-commerce and your general ledger and your accounts receivable at a functional level need to be connected without this kind of perception of back office, knowing that they're all needed to achieve a successful go-to-market. And those 2 things have been boiling away. Now, what has changed is the understanding of the customer. Because it's really the customer situation that's driving some change in perceptions. And with the customer, what we've got is a historical, especially in a recurring revenue business, right? If I can acquire and I can renew, I'm fine, right? Whereas a lot of the agility is really starting to pack into the relationship you have, right? How do we adapt and change the relationship over time with the customer in mind? And that's anything from payment terms to maybe more lightweight product and package offerings, to the ability to pause or suspend voluntarily without losing a customer, without them churning. So these kinds of things, and this awareness for agility in the middle has really increased the urgency of investment in those areas of adaptability right now.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now, Brian, given Steve's answer, I want to hear your perspective. I want to find out what you've been hearing from clients you've worked with regard to the sense of urgency around digital transformation, and specifically, has the sense of urgency, and if so, how has the sense of urgency around digital transformation changed amid the pandemic?
Yeah, the sense of urgency really has changed. Almost universally, companies have backburnered large enterprise-wide transformation programs in favor of a much more surgical approach that can impact their bottom line in a much shorter time frame. Financial uncertainty, obviously, in the face of this pandemic is really the largest concern we're hearing from CFOs pretty much universally. And much like during the Great Recession, companies are trying to do more with less. There's also a concerted focus on removing any leakage in the revenue processes, as they have, really the largest tangible near-term benefits. This is really the low-hanging fruit of kind of the day, and hand in hand with revenue leakage is also IT infrastructure consolidation, and specifically infrastructure consolidation around billing systems. Consolidation is really the tried and true business improvement technique, kind of the go-to play in the playbook. And finally, automating and improving collections really have become front and center. There's no better tool for preserving revenue than getting a promise to pay from one of your customers.
Especially now. Thank you, Brian. Andrew, with regard to Brian's observations regarding sense of urgency around digital transformation amid the pandemic, has what Brian just shared reflected what you have observed as well, Andrew?
Yeah, 100%. I would say, for most CFOs, there was a very sharp focus and continued focus on cash preservation, improving forecasting, and dealing with a lot of little things like impairments. But for about 5% of CFOs, we're seeing them really lean in to this opportunity, if you will. They bolstered their balance sheets in April and May and are now making plans and even direct investments to really start to differentiate their business even further.
Thank you very much, Andrew. One question that I feel compelled to raise, and I want to return to you, Steve, in posing this, finance doesn't exist in a vacuum any more than any other area of an organization exists in a vacuum. So with that in mind, Steve, as we continue our discussion about digital transformation, I wanted to hear how you're advising finance, both finance and operations executives, when it comes to thinking through a wholesale lead to revenue transformation approach versus, say, an incremental approach. What are your recommendations, and what are you typically sharing with finance and operations executives, Steve?
Well, the baseline of best practices remains the same. The key themes and best practices been developed over the last 5 to 10 years continue to be true. What we see is obviously a change of emphasis, right? A big emphasis on now, like right now. So we're seeing a need, obviously, to adapt very quickly in every area of lead to revenue operations for this either temporary or new normal, right? And that really is setting the context for how we navigate, right? How we help our executives in sales or finance operations navigate this, because there's a need to take tactical actions. Those tactical actions still need to be connected. If you're going to change your payment terms, you better let your customer support function know about it, right? In very simple terms. So the big theme though here is while I've still got the strategic and functional and customer viewpoints that I've had for pre-COVID and will post, I'm doing things now, and are they temporary or are they permanent? What are the learnings we're using and taking from what's going on? What is actually, I think when Andrew and I were talking yesterday, right, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And so where is this new necessity essentially giving us inventions that are things to keep and make sure we embed them into our ongoing best practice? So finding that line for any particular client's organization about what's the right lesson to learn here, what's the right way to win on the tactics, but make sure we're still kind of moving towards the path of end-to-end optimization and those strategic goals, of long-term go-to-market growth.
Thank you, Steve. Brian, I want to pose this question in a different way, where we consider our discussion of, say, finance and applications of technological advances in an operational context. Specifically, Brian, in your experience, how have you observed companies thinking about operationalizing, again, from an operational perspective, the lead-to-revenue process and corresponding technology landscape that supports operationalizing the lead-to-revenue process? What have you observed?
So what we're seeing are companies are really focusing on processes and technology that will have the biggest impact on revenue and customer experience, first and foremost. Many companies out there have already implemented CRM and ERP. So they've realized that value proposition, and they're now looking for other areas, like the middle office, for revenue growth. And, that invariably leads to, looking in depth at some of the revenue processes within the organization. Not only are companies focusing on revenue preservation, but also focusing on optimizing and improving revenue processes, like Andrew mentioned, new monetization strategies, for example. Companies are looking into them and evaluating them, specifically around recurring revenue and consumption-based models. But this is really hard to do without technology. In the end of the day, being with a software company, technology is really kind of our sweet spot, and we hear this all the time that companies, what they do is completely unique, right? And this is kind of the big back and forth that I think goes on within most organizations. Companies firmly believe that how they sell, price, or bill is fundamentally unique, and that an out-of-the-box solution can't solve that, so they go and build something in-house. But what they do is they go and build something in-house exactly how the business operates today. And guess what? It's basically obsolete by the time they go live. And to be honest, just about every company out there, the actual billing of your end customer is not a competitive differentiator. So the really smart companies, the ones that are innovative, they're out there looking for a true platform for monetization within the middle office. And you take that platform approach, and the end results are accelerated time to market for new offerings, and really unprecedented agility. And at the end of the day, those competitive differentiators were what the companies were after when they built that internal billing system all along.
I think that's really crucial, Brian, and I appreciate your highlighting that, especially that it's the business model and the ability to adapt the business model that is ultimately crucial, and recognizing that a business model needs to adapt. But I now want to talk about revenue preservation, and specifically with regard to enabling members of our audience to appreciate the critical impact that a lead-to-revenue optimization can have on business processes and, of course, the overall business. So in that context, Steve, I want to pose this question to you. Amid the pandemic, and specifically within the last 12 months and looking ahead to, say, 2021 and beyond, how have you observed companies are adapting their lead-to-revenue strategies and processes, at the very least, to preserve revenue? What are you seeing, Steve?
Well, a whole range of different themes. I think coming back to the poll responses, that absolutely jives with me. I think that's what we're seeing in our clients. In fact, within probably every one of our clients, there's the mindset of both, hey, our strategy hasn't changed, and, oh crap, we've got to make some change. So I think that duality is right on. You're pressing down into what it takes, right? Depends on the business, right? We've got some clients who work in the medical space, for example. In the medical space, seeing a doctor online was a sign of like low cost providing, outsourcing, offshore, right? Dramatically, 6 months later, right, the massive volume of actually value add digital and virtually based medical care, right, is a completely different ball game in terms of scale, and in terms of the scale of particular types of service that are needed. So that in that case, we've got growth, but preservation is not just about preserving yourself from revenue growth problems in terms of the scale of growth. It's actually making sure you can fulfill and delight the customer, provide the service and experience that they expect at scale. So that's a one uptick area which we're seeing a significant amount of. Then obviously we're seeing a lot of change and flexibility needs, right? Those change and flexibility needs are largely around preservation of customer relationships in hard times, right? So there's a big theme of in hard times, I need to kind of tailor down my use of your product because I'm tailored down, right? I need to pause because my revenue has paused. So there's a lot of, or I need to slow my cash flow on payments to you because my cash flow has been disrupted. So that emphasis on customer and some of that adaptability has been absolutely essential to preserving. And I'll just put one key point on this, both the scaling issue and if you like, the customer preservation, churn prevention, or more positively, actually engaging the customer, right, through these times. it's a team sport. Again, this theme of lead to revenue as a team sport continues to be apparent. If I'm going to change payments, I need to have customer success and customer service and sales and billing and order management in the loop about how we're doing that, right? And so they need to coordinate and have shared platforms to Brian's main point, right? And Andrew, I think when we all come by is that this is about platforms and thinking like platforms. So we're seeing that those key needs to both preserve how you perform with scale and preserve through the customer relationship with this theme of making sure you're a team sport. So and it's a very busy year for most of our customers trying to make all this work.
Thank you, Steve. Brian, I want to hear your thoughts about changes with regard to strategies and processes concerning lead to revenue. What have you seen, Brian?
Yeah, for sure. Companies are really, they're doubling down on protecting their current business for sure. That's a kind of leading theme here. We're seeing companies become a lot more flexible with their end customers, right? So just look at the airline industry dropping change fees. I mean, that's was a very strong source of revenue for them. We've also seen several companies launch what they call COVID specials. So, limited time pricing to increase, sales or even just maintain sales. We've seen a lot of success with companies launching these specials. Another area that we've seen quite a bit of traction is around, forbearance of contractual obligations. I use the term contractual obligations because we have seen this from, on the real simple side, being able to pause the subscription, but we deal with a lot of large enterprise customers, and those customers who their end customers have multi-year contracts with them with things like guaranteed uplifts. So, pausing a contract like that is a heck of a lot more complicated than just putting a subscription on pause. You have, all sorts of revenue complications there. So that's really been an area of focus is, flexibility on handling, pauses in one customer's business by another customer. And so, I think the last one, kind of really to nobody's surprise is automating collections has really taken on a lot of importance as companies really try to preserve cash. The big question, though, I think is, for me, and I think a lot of other folks, Andrew and Stephen included, is this the new normal, or is this going to be, is this new normal going to be temporary or permanent? How much of this will continue after the pandemic ends? I personally imagine these trends are going to linger for quite some time, and in the end, it's really going to reward those companies who chose flexibility, whether that flexibility is in dealing with their own customers or in adopting a flexible platform approach.
Thank you, Brian. Your comment has raised a question I want to pose to you, Andrew. Amid the new normal, which continues to change, of course, is there, and if so, what is the winning revenue preservation formula? What's the right mix, Andrew, of process adjustments and investments and tools to preserve revenue?
I think I go back to one of the things that Steve said, which is these things are a team sport. And if you look at, say, adopting a cash culture, which more and more organizations obviously have, that's something that exists not just in the collections department, but has got to be drilled into sales incentive plans that sales ops puts out, to how sales execs communicate with customers and where they focus their attention and efforts. So it's very much around process first, and then when you get into wanting to have more flexibility, wanting to understand exactly what the deeper nature of the relationship is with a customer, you then have to start looking at, well, where does that information reside, and do we have the right tools to capture that kind of information? And so ultimately you go from a focus around process, which is important, to then a focus around making sure that you've got the right tooling to be able to provide the kind of flexibility and agility that everyone's talking about here.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I think I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about revenue preservation. Before we talk, as we talk about business unification, focus on helping our audience understand the critical impact that LeadtoRevenue optimization has on unifying business processes and technology. Steve, what examples can you share scenarios that you can share regarding customers being able to move their LeadtoRevenue processes forward through business unification?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the basics, right? If we click our heels and go to Kansas with LeadtoRevenue, we'd be saying, look, this is great. I run as a single organization with many customers and many products. And I can sell any product to any customer in a way that's packaged and priced to make sense for that revenue growth, right? That would be our ideal condition. Now, what happens there is that, of course, we want to be operationally streamlined, right? So duplication is in generally a bad sign of being operationally streamlined. And duplication or triplication of how you might, say, process orders or billing or payments, right, is a bad sign that the customer's going to get a single unified service experience. So that's all well and good. Obviously, like single, simple, streamlined would be serve both our operational needs and go to market. Now, what happens is what we call the kind of the law of entropy in LeadtoRevenue systems, because over time, we kind of reset the LeadtoRevenue foundations, and then they change and they grow. So right now, for example, we may be adding special standard procedures or little automation widgets or certain temporary policies, quote unquote, that end up being permanent, and they become a permanent part of our operation. And that's normal. That happens all the time. So what we see is this law of entropy where people's LeadtoRevenue platforms become more complex, become more distracted. They have more bolt-on processes. We also see acquisitions that continue to kind of add growth. Oh, no, now we've got 2 billing systems, right? Some of our clients get up to 50 billing systems. So as we see acquisitions, and then we see going international, and then we see adding, say, vertical market sectors, we see fragmentation. And the battle strategically is to keep kind of bringing all those innovations and additions and changes back into a convergent single platform, right? So we're really trying to minimize the number of sales platforms, minimize the number of billing systems, minimize, so for sure, our AR and accounting and collections control platforms want to be extraordinarily unified. So that unification process is a battle. It involves strat and tactics, and it involves not just design, but kind of a method of how you can go through what we call the Rubik's Cube of solving for what combination of, say, e-commerce, CPQ, billing, and RevRec, right, those major building blocks, what combinations you fix them in for which of the revenue streams at one time, so we can move with kind of a borderline agile approach through steady and methodical unification of the business. So that's how we see that laying out in front of us right now.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Brian, I want to hear your thoughts, posing the very same question about business unification and how to apply best practices and principles of business unification to move LeadtoRevenue processes forward.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to start with sharing a couple customer stories. The first customer the first customer of ours, I should say, that I'm going to talk about here was seeing pretty significant and consistent revenue leakage. If you look at their technology stack, they had 30 plus different billing systems, which isn't uncommon for large enterprises. After many years of organic growth, as well as acquisitions, they tend to have acquired many billing systems over the year. And so, they embarked on the project of consolidating these disparate billing solutions. And, that alone has saved them, somewhere between $3 and $9 million a year just in contracting costs. There's also unquantified value and time savings from employees, leveraging automated processes. All too often I hear just all of these manual things that people go through just to kind of get the period closed, for example. I think, most importantly, though, was, the increased revenue generated from the accelerated deployment of new products and services. That was the most impactful outcome for them as well. And I think same with the second customer. This other customer had basically a core billing system that they had built out over a 20-year period. And during those 20 years, the company evolved around organic growth and acquisition, as I mentioned, just like the kind of first company. What was different was they had really invested heavily into that billing system, and as they had these other acquisitions and other mergers that came in, they weren't integrated, so they kind of left into silos on their own, and were just added to the tech landscape for the most part. And at one point they had a new product launch. The product launch was going one way, and basically the billing was going the other way. And what happened was they were basically unable to bill a product that they launched, and were literally giving the service away for free. So that's an extreme example. Probably won't see that very often, but kind of a culmination of a multiple different things going on all at once. But in the end, we were able to consolidate their billing systems and decrease new product launches from what was close to a year to basically under 2 weeks.
I appreciate the sharing the stories that you have. I want to conclude our discussion quickly by inviting first Steve and then Andrew and Brian to indicate predictions regarding LeadtoRevenue priorities in 2021, starting with Steve. And again, briefly, Steve, Andrew, and Brian, what do you anticipate, starting with Steve, will be the primary drivers for 2021 regarding moving digital transformation agenda forward, specifically with regard to LeadtoRevenue?
4 things. Number 1, clarity of go-to-market vision and the customer interaction that you expect to have over the time horizon in front of us. Right? Go-to-market vision and the customer interactions there. Number 2, optimizing for the customer, and there's a really important point here, that by optimizing the customer, we optimize for ourselves too. Rarely by adding complexity to a process or an abundance of SKUs or manual scrolling through spreadsheets are we creating a timely and delightful experience for our customer. So, while we are, by the way, back in 2019, we were seeing an increasing move to not just growth, but growth and optimization of how effective we are at delivering that growth. And we're seeing that as being more important, right? So while we've got the hood open, let's make sure we're driving both customer value and internal value, and they are the same thing. They can be aligned around concepts of speed and accuracy and cleanliness, right? Number 3 is organizational alignment around what done looks like. Team sport rules, right? So if we've got a plan for 2021, you better believe that's got to be connected between sales, sales ops, product marketing, and finance, right? Not to mention the service delivery areas. And number 4 is execute the right priorities. Keep things tagged and bagged and executing with discipline against those priorities, knowing that things may change, but if you don't know where you're going, anywhere it'll get you there, and you've got to be rigorous on execution. So that's the 4. GTM, optimize for the customer and yourself, organize around what done is, and execute, with some real governance and oversight.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for highlighting these key points. I want to hear your thoughts, Brian, regarding how enterprises will prioritize CPQ, revenue recognition, billing, and collections investments heading into 2021. Brian?
Yeah, and I think that it's maybe not prioritizing, but looking at LeadtoRevenue process holistically. We see this also often. Basically, these are looked at as basically separate and distinct solutions, and they really need to be looked at as one. LeadtoRevenue, the process in general, is often looked at in silos also by the business as well. So you have sales versus finance, right? The front office versus the back office. I can't stress enough how many times we've worked with customers who the billing teams launched a billing initiative, and then it's something that's different than what the sales team has launched, having to do with CPQ, for example, or new sales process, new sales methodology. And we see it all the time where the two are just not connected, they're not in sync. So what ends up happening is you have a sales process that can't be billed, and in other cases you have a billing system that is looking at kind of a point in time and looking at what they have from the front office, and the two just don't speak. And so, if I would have one piece of advice for the financial folks out there today, and that's, work closer with sales. I've worked on both sides. I've worked for a CPQ software company. I've worked for, obviously billing software company now. And the most successful projects that we've worked on have had both stakeholders involved.
Thank you very much, Brian. Andrew, before we pose our third of three polling questions, and I think we have time for one question from an attendee, a great question from an attendee. Andrew, I want to hear your thoughts about what you anticipate will be the biggest opportunity for finance leaders with regard to LeadtoRevenue in 2021.
I would say it's never let a crisis go to waste, and that this is a tremendous opportunity for CFOs to take the lead in LeadtoRevenue, and that's really, in most organizations, that's who should be leading the LeadtoRevenue capability and process within an organization. We've seen organizations have more resilience and capacity for change than we ever believed. This is the time for CFOs to really drive alignment, as Steve and Brian were talking about, across the organization. And I think 2021 is a great time to look at driving more pricing agility, because that's an additional competitive weapon that doesn't really require a big R&D outlay.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew, Brian, and Steve. I think we have time for a great question from an attendee, and I think, Steve, I think this would be ideal for you. An attendee asks, Steve, with rapidly changing customer preferences, amidst tense price war competition, business players in the saturated market, what are three strategies, what would you characterize as three key strategies that can help a CFO retain market share, preserve revenue post-pandemic? I would even add, during the pandemic. So, Steve, I wanted to hear your thoughts regarding this particular question.
Love a pub quiz, but yeah. So the three things that I would put on the table. Number one would be borrowing a best practice from industries. We are seeing a lot of customer kind of more variably engaged. Number two is massive, which is granularity of your packaging capabilities. So when you've got a range of products or services that you typically combine or present as one thing, either a guided sell or actually bundle, you really need to be able to fragment and slice them up so you can right size to the customer's demand. So when the customer wants a lower price, you want to compete on a more aggressive pricing method, you don't just do that for free. That doesn't just come from discounting. That's a race to the bottom strategy. You've got to compete on price by really tuning how much of your product and service you give to them for certain price points. So that's an area, usually a back door to the company that's not properly attended to and needs to be. And number three is really Number three is about just being smart about how you price. Understand that, what we do see a fair amount of is, well, we sell generally at this price, and that's our kind of water cooler practice standard, and we have one measurement at, say, average unit price or price per unit or price per user or what have you. Those metrics are a bit too chunky now. You've got to break down your customer set and understand your pricing strategy for different strains and strands of your customer set with more precision than probably in the past. So those are the big three.
Thank you very much, Steve. Great considerations, important considerations to keep in mind. Once again, I want to convey my appreciation to Andrew and Steve and Brian for such an engaging and informative discussion. And we want to thank attendees for joining us for our webinar, Executive Insight, Accelerating Growth and Protecting Margins by Optimizing LeadtoRevenue, brought to you by Argyle, the publisher of CFO Magazine and CFO.com, and sponsored by BillingPlatform and Navint. We thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.